Hey, I'm Dean and this is Legacy Voyage. In Season 1, I'm documenting my journey to earning my first 100K net worth as a full-time college student. Join me as I share some of the lessons I learned along the way.
Today has been a busy week, so I haven't really prioritized doing a podcast episode, but I just had a huge epiphany on life. And I was speaking with the partner at the VC firm I'm interning with. He was walking me through how they look at companies, especially in the venture world, and put a value on them. How do you value a company that's literally losing money? Because in search funds in the private equity world, they look at the cash flow statement and the balance sheet, and then they try to find how much they're going to earn over the next 5 years and then evaluate based on that. Or they look at similar companies and what they're trading for. But in the venture world, if a company is literally creating a whole new category that's never been done for in the entire world, how in the world are you going to evaluate them? How do you know how much it's worth? And so he was walking me through that. And at the very end of the day, I think with evaluating, doesn't matter if it's venture, it doesn't matter if it's private equity or public. At the very end of the day, it just comes down to balancing risk and reward. There's a lot of risk in venture because a lot of companies that you're going to invest in are going to go bust though. So you're really banking on the fact that one of them is going to take off and shoot to the moon. And the same thing in public. Like if I invest in S&P 500, it's a regular index fund, then my risk is very low. Reward is also very low. And I was applying that to investing, but really zooming out of all of this and looking at life in the game of life. And I talked about this before. It seems like it's this huge balancing act between risk and reward. And it's so important that as we're young, as a 19-year-old, that I go out there and I take these risks. Because with taking those risks in the long run, over the horizon, long-term thinking, I'm going to get way bigger rewards. And that's something that I'm super excited for and why I think I'm a big believer in taking risks while you're young. Because if you try new things, more opportunities open up and more rewards are in the making. I'm about to run through some epiphanies that I had over the week, starting with the first one, which came from last Sunday. I was in church learning about this story, and I've heard this story a couple times, but there was a key takeaway that I got from it. And I think the first epiphany that I want to share is that whenever I'm reading stories or books, it's interesting because when I go back to them, I always take out something new. And it's really cool because the words on the page, they never change. They never do. But it's me who changes. And so when I look back at those same exact words 10 years ago, a year ago, even yesterday, I grabbed something new that I didn't know before. And I didn't focus on it before. And for this story, it was the same way. It was a story, I think it's like an offering place. Jesus is there. He's looking at all the people who are giving their offerings. There's a whole bunch of rich people and they're throwing in their cash because they're rich. They have money. And a widow comes by. A widow gives her offering, and it was everything she had. It was only a few cents, but it was everything she had. And Jesus says, "Come here, my disciples, look at what she's done." And I want to quote this. This is from the King James Version. It says, "For all they did cast in of their abundance, but she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living." And that was, I never focused on that part before, but that was really big for me because it's easy when it's easy. It's easy when you have the money, when everything around you is going well. It's easy to do the easy things. Like even Sermon on the Mount where he's talking about love your enemies. He says, don't even the tax collectors, don't even the pagans, even they love the people who are nice to them. That's easy. It's when you have to love your enemies is when it's difficult. It's when the rubber hits the road is when it's difficult. It's when you're a widow and this is all you have and you give it as an offering. That's when it's hard. That's when it's difficult. And so when those three things come together, that the rubber in the road, when those two things hit, that's when you really find out who you are. That's when your character comes out. Because I don't think it's the easy times that define who you are. I think it's the hard times and what you do in the face of adversity that define the person you are. And that's one thing I wanted to share right there. Another thing I want to share is, again, last Sunday, we were in Elders Quorum. Elders Quorum is like where all the men are meeting and we're talking, having the lesson together. But this one was different because usually they separate the super old people from the younger guys. Like they'll separate me as a 19-year-old from the 70-year-olds who are up there. But there's so much wisdom that these old men have that you can only gain from life. You can only get this wisdom from experience. And listening to some of the insights that they were giving, it was so valuable. One of them said, looking back at his entire life, there were about three major turning points where he could either go left or go right. And depending on what he chose, his life would have ended up completely different than where he is right now. And what I thought was interesting was that at these split roads he mentioned, there were some people who came into his life that helped him choose which way to go. And that's something that, looking at my life and my short 19 years of living, I'm not sure if it's major turning points, but I've definitely seen that with me too. People who came into my life at split roads and helped me to choose whichever way I chose. The last epiphany I want to share is this quote I heard, brought it up at Institute, but it was originally coined by my boy Aristotle. And Aristotle said, every virtue carried to the extreme is a vice. For example, if you think of something like being courageous, I think being courageous, that's something of virtue. You want to be the person who's looking to go do big things, who wants to have that courage. But when you take that too far and that courage slowly turns into pride, slowly turns into having an ego, that's when it becomes a vice. Another thing is being humble. Of course, you want someone to be humble and not be bragging about themselves 24/7. But when being humble is taken too far, where you start letting people walk all over you, and then you become a pushover, and then you start lying to make yourself look bad because you want to be humble, even though you did super well. You can even apply it to something like generosity. I think generosity is a great virtue. But if you take generosity way too far, where if someone, all they have to do is ask and you'll give it to them. Doesn't matter what it is, where you start just giving out money, giving out cash, to the point where people just start relying on you and they don't even take any responsibility for what they have to do. They'll just come to you and you constantly give them stuff without letting them take on some responsibility. That's when generosity as a virtue becomes a vice. And I think this is really important because it shows us not to take every single thing too far, which I think is really important. For the life update, there are a couple things that happened this week. As always, meeting really cool people in the garage, learning a whole bunch more things, working with Raj and Skylar on their search funds, and then a whole bunch more on venture capital. And man, so much that I'm learning. I think the biggest update for today was a meeting I had yesterday on Friday. And it was the first time where I really sat down as a team for Nisha News and we're thinking through everything. And I'm super excited for what this could be because I think it can be really, really big. And I'm super excited for that. The biggest takeaway from the meeting, after we're talking about just introducing each other as a team and talking about what we're going to be using in terms of tech, plans for the future, we really hit on this 3-phase plan for growth. Phase 1 is we're just setting up the foundation for everything. Get familiar with the tech, with each other, get things off the ground, get things up and running. That's phase 1. Phase 2 will be optimization. As we get things off the ground, we start gaining an audience. We want to see who is engaging the most, what age group, different demographics, where are they from, what are they interested in, things like that, and then start optimizing the content for those people so that we get more engagement, more impressions. Which really the name of the game is to get as many impressions as possible and then start selling those to advertisers and which will be in step 3 in phase 3 is monetization, where we start thinking of how to actually monetize these impressions. Because once we get the eyeballs, then after that, it's easier to sell the eyeballs. But yeah, that's the life update. I had a lot of work this past week, but it just feels like play, so I'm loving it. Of course, always have to make time for the workouts, for the eating, for my health, of course, which is number 1. And then relationships, calling the fam, hanging out with people. It's always important. And yeah, feeling good. Looking forward to next week. We'll see what it holds, but I'll see you then. I record these episodes completely free to share success with everyone. So the only thing I ask is that if you learned anything or found something interesting in this episode, just leave a review and share it with a friend. Only takes 5 seconds and it would mean the world. Thanks, and I'll see you in the next episode. Tatok, see you.